It's Saturday, and welcome to another episode of PO Cubed, your chronological guide to Nintendo's handheld consoles. My name's DD Ash, and this week we're playing Quarth, Penguin Land, Flappy Special, SD Gundam, SD Sengokuden, Kunitori Monogatari, and Trump Boy. Let's start the show.
Utte, 消すと癖になるシューティングパズルゲームクォース好評発売中。コナミゲームボーイソフト K ボーイズ続々登場。コナミ
Quarth DMG-QR, developed by Ultra Games and published by Konami. Pick two games, any two games, at random. Now try to imagine what the mongrel offspring of those two games would play like. Quarth is kind of like a cross between Tetris and Space Invaders. Sold yet? Well, allow me to elaborate. You have a playfield with a little ship at the bottom that fires blocks at constantly encroaching shapes. These shapes are made up of the blocks that you're firing, and it's your job to create filled-in quadrilaterals from them. For example, if you have a U shape coming towards you, shoot in between the two sides of the U until the middle fills in, making a perfect rectangle. The shape will then vanish, giving you a point for each constituent block. You can of course add more blocks to it, making the quadrilateral larger and giving you more points. If the shapes reach the bottom, however, you die. This won't happen to you at the lower difficulties because the movement is so slow. Try it on level 9 though, and it's a different story. There's a countdown score that you need to attain by the end of the level. After you get it down to 0, it starts counting up, with every point thereafter being worth more than 1 once the level ends. The layouts are predetermined, kind of like a music scroll on a self-playing piano, but by adding more blocks to it, you can boost your score higher. Choose the random option at the start if this doesn't appeal to you. You can choose between 6 ships at the start of the game, but it makes no difference save a visual one. They all look pretty silly. There are various power-ups that you're given if you clear big enough groups of blocks, and these sit in a designated area on the right of the screen. You cycle through them with down on the D-pad. There's a lightning bolt that clears the entire screen, which is best saved for emergencies. There is a square with lines under it. This temporarily increases your shot speed. The music is pretty dull, and visually it does what it needs to. It's not important to blow you away in these departments, and the controls are tight and responsive, making Quarth an enjoyable enough experience. You can fire blocks quickly and accurately by counting off the button presses, and they always go where you intend. If you screw this one up, it's probably your own fault. Penguin Land DMG-PLJ, developed by Atelier Double and published by Pony Canyon. You may have heard of a console called the NES. It was apparently moderately successful in some parts of the world. If you grew up stateside in the 1980s or early 90s, then you will undoubtedly be acquainted with the original 8-bit home console from Nintendo. However, over in Europe, we were arguably more at home with Sega's Master System. The video game market didn't suffer from the same chokehold that Nintendo had in North America, and the variety was much richer for it. As a result, Penguin Land, or Doki Doki Penguin Land, may well be more familiar to European listeners. I remember this cute little platform puzzler as a kid. What I didn't know was this adventure was actually available on the Game Boy, if you were lucky enough to live in Japan. You play as, obviously, a penguin who is tasked with rescuing these 3 penguin eggs that have been lost on an alien planet. You don't have to search for them, rather, your job is to guide the eggs down to the bottom of these icy caverns without breaking them. There are various obstacles that are stopping you from doing this, such as polar bears that try to smash them, but you're not completely powerless. There are pushable blocks that can crush them. Transporting the egg is intuitive. You can dig through certain blocks with the B button, but be aware that the eggs can only fall a certain height, 3 tile spaces, before splattering on the ground. You yourself can jump on the egg, but only if it can squeeze out from under you, else you crush it. If you're too slow, a bird comes to try to steal the egg. There are 25 levels in the Game Boy version of Penguin Land, of which you can choose your starting stage. Many aspects of this port are faithful to the original. It looks nice despite the lack of the vibrant colours, and everything is clear. The music is well composed and catchy. However, we have one big shortcoming to contend with. The original scrolls vertically, as you might expect, seeing as you're navigating down a cavern. However, on the Master System, the entire width of the screen was static. It was all on one screen. Here, the screen is essentially 2 full widths wide. This would only be a minor hindrance, except that when you cross that imaginary central line, the whole game pauses so that it can scroll, and if you're trying to maneuver down that middle part of the level, the screen will flick left and right all the time, completely killing any rhythm you might work up. And this happens vertically as well. You're constantly waiting for the game to catch up to your movements. Unfortunately, not a successful way to compensate for screen blur. I may be biased at times to the Game Boy, but I'm the first to comment on the limitations. Although I don't think the hardware was the problem here. It's such a simple game visually, it would surely have been possible to port a suitable version of Penguin Land to the Game Boy. Overall, a decent effort let down by one programming oversight. The Game Boy version is alright, but Penguin Land is better experienced on the SMS. Flappy Special DMG-V2A, developed by DB Soft and published by Victor Interactive Software. Remember Flappy Bird? The Why Is This a Phenomenon in 2014 app for mobile devices was a pretty huge deal for some reason. Thankfully, this is nothing to do with that. Flappy, or Floppy, oh dear, is a series of largely Japan-exclusive games by developer DB Soft, in the Eggerland vein. It featured on several home computers in the early to mid-80s, but lay somewhat dormant for at least 5 years until this port came out. There are 160 levels. That's a lot of game, but there's a simple 4-character password and unlimited continues to help get you through. The aim of each stage is to push a particular flashing rock onto a flashing platform. You do so by filling holes and crushing or otherwise circumventing obstacles such as gaps and enemies. Often you need to push blocks halfway across other ones to create a kind of bridge that allows you to transport the important block to otherwise unreachable places. The rocks respond to gravity, but Flappy doesn't. You can flap, I guess, back up. This doesn't make a lot of sense, seeing as how Flappy is actually a mole, not a bird. But I'm not here to justify physics in a cartoon video game. Hell, I'm still trying to work out why a mole would care about rolling a flashing boulder onto a plinth. I guess it's about as purposeful as pushing crates onto designated squares in a warehouse. More on that again shortly. You can only push rocks, you can't pull, so be wary of getting them stuck in corners. Occasionally you can collect a mushroom. There are enemies walking around that you can make sleep by hurling the mushrooms at them. This can stop them hurting you, or allow you to use them as a platform to help solve a puzzle. I think there are only 2 enemies, a crab thing and something that looks like a chick. Chickens are born underground, didn't you know that? The music is chirpy and kind of sweet, and fits the cartoonish feel of the game, although the game does lose out for not using any decent sound effects. Graphically though, everything is cramped. It doesn't need to be, as the brick borders fill at least half the screen. To waste that much space on such a minuscule screen is criminal. Any charm or detail is greatly compromised, which is why the very few things to see in Flappy Special are basically indistinguishable. The most charming thing in the game comes when you beat a level. Flappy walks across the screen and bows to you, saying, "Congratulations." There might be a storyline. It's probably something to do with saving some planet from some evil, all-powerful overlord, which inexplicably has well-organised boulders as its kryptonite. But it probably doesn't matter. Anyway, Flappy Special goes into the well-populated but nonetheless healthy category of puzzle Game Boy game, and it's not bad at all. Looks aren't everything, and I'll probably never finish it, it's such a long game. You'll probably have to import it, but it shouldn't be too expensive, it's a common game in Japan. Give it a go.
for a Game Boy, you better believe you can spend your whole life playing Game Boy! Game Boy! Sucking and walking and back and muffin and Game Boy! Game Boy!
SD Gundam, SD Sengokuden, Kunatori Monogatari, DMG-SDJ, developed by Sotsu Agency Sunrise and published by Bandai. Gundam is one of those franchises that I sort of know but don't, if you know what I mean. It's famous enough that the name, if nothing else, has made it out of Japan. If you gave me a pen and paper and told me to write down everything I know about it, I'd perhaps get 2 bullet points out at most. I know it's an anime, and I know it's something to do with fighting robots. Actually, I could add a third thing to this list. There were a chunk of Game Boy games devoted to it. I never actually played any of them as they were Japan only, and kind of inaccessible unless you could read the text. The first on the list roughly translates to The Story of a Country Thief in the Sengoku period of Japanese history, which doesn't really tally up with what I know about Gundam. It turns out the SD stands for Super Deformed, and is kind of a Gundam spin-off, whereby the characters are anthropomorphized and put into more real storylines, in some horrific parody/fanfiction that did not encourage me to delve further. Hey, I knew when I was starting this project that parts of it were going to be hard work that needed to be ploughed through, and so it proved here. This is an interesting concept on the surface of it. Half strategy, half side view fighting sequences. However, both parts of the game have massive, and I mean massive, pitfalls that really damage this to the point where it's not even a game. The overhead view makes no sense. There are all of these flags that encroach you, but it's not turn-based, it just happens. You can move a cursor around the grid, but none of the buttons seem to do anything. Allegedly, this is where the strategy comes in, but instead of a war simulator, it's more of a mill about until they get to you simulator. Eventually, when enough of the, I guess, enemy flags cover the map, you'll come into contact with an opponent and get thrown into the action bits. If the map scenes are confusing, the actiony bits are nigh unplayable. I sort of see what was being aimed at here, but it's as if the game plays at 200% speed. This might have simply been a frame rate oversight, but surely this gets picked up in testing, right? Even the timer counts down way faster than seconds do. You and the opposing mech are bouncing around what looks like a temple or a museum, or sometimes the countryside, flinging swords around. The enemy isn't on the same screen as you most of the time, and when it is, you both move way too fast, so good luck even making contact. I don't mind the graphics. It seems like this was the only area of the game where any effort was applied. The characters look cool, and the close-ups are well drawn. It's a pity the graphics weren't used correctly for anything resembling a game. The music, if it can be called as such, is absolute garbage. Only a couple of the channels seem to be used for music, the others are taken up by some horrific low droning that at first made me think my earphones were packing up. But no, the ROM version does the same thing. I've translated the title as well as I can, but any combination of syllables I can stitch together have no correlation with anything you'll find in the game. At the time of recording, no actual fan translations have been made. That's not to say one wasn't started, but the level of saintly patience needed to finish can't possibly exist in one person. My Japanese and programming knowledge is too low for me to do it, thank God. This might be the worst game in the library so far. Master Karateka and Hyper Load Runner were pretty shocking, and this is definitely down there. Want to know something even worse? There were 2 sequels to this. Plow through it is then. Trump Boy DMG-TBJ, developed and published by Pack-In Video. This is a collection of various card games, none of which are massively compelling. You can play Daifugo, which translates as Grand Millionaire, Speed, and Nervous Breakdown. The object of Daifugo is to get rid of all the cards you have as fast as possible, by playing progressively stronger cards than those put down by the previous player. Typically, players will do this by throwing away their weaker cards first, But there are strategies available to screw over your opponents, which gives this game its other title, Asshole. It's designed for 5 players, meaning while you can play with a link cable, ultimately the majority of the opposition will be CPU, and that brings all the scummy nonsense that comes with trying to program AI to play a game of chance. Let's just say you probably won't win this one. Speed is not dissimilar in that the object is to discard your entire hand. Now though, it's quicker. You need to play cards that are one higher, one lower, or the same as one of the 2 piles in the center. Once you go below 5 cards, you have to take more into your hand until the deck is depleted. Nervous breakdown. In my house we called this concentration or something like that. All 52 cards are laid face down in a grid, and the idea is to pick 2 at random to make pairs. If they match, you win them. If they don't, you put them back where you got them. At the end, the winner is the one with the most cards. You know what I'm gonna say. Don't play this against the CPU. Clearly, it was beyond the programmer to write a fairness module for this. Whether you've uncovered potential pairs or not, the computer player will pull matches out of its arse. It doesn't even give you a sliver of a chance. For 2 players, this might be a little fairer, but by the time you untangled your link cable and got the 2 Game Boys set up, you could have laid out a real deck of cards and done this. Or, ideally, something else. No time was wasted making the game look flashy either. The design of the cards is bog standard, and there's nothing else accompanying it. The music is a rather naff collection of classics, featuring the entertainer. And it's not for lack of skill in either of those departments. Remember, this is the same company who made Battleship early on, and I've already opined as to how gorgeous that game looks and sounds. Trump Boy is one of those little nuggets. I'm talking about the ones that won't flush rather than the golden ones, that exist for no apparent reason other than somebody had to code it to meet a deadline or something. There's not a great deal of information on this game on the internet, and unfortunately the title prompts some less than savoury search results. And I'm not even talking porn here. Thanks for listening to the Portable Power Podcast. If you want to support the show, the best way to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/Portable Power Podcast. Or subscribe on the YouTubes. We have daily uploads Monday to Friday, where you can watch me suck at the games as I talk about them. You can tweet me at POCubed or on any of the other socials you might expect. Thanks again and have a great weekend.